It's time for the Matt Anderson Show. Committed to encouraging, uplifting, and inspiring a generation.
My message to you is to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind.
Hey, y'all, what's happening? I'm Matt Anderson. So glad that you connected with us here online. We're talking inside of this quarantine conversation about a very, very important topic. We're seeing folks crying out, screaming out, tearing stuff down because of the pain that they're feeling. And many of them are our sons. Many of them are our daughters. These are marginalized voices that are not heard oftentimes. And of course, Dr. King said that, Riot is the voice of the voiceless or the unheard. And a perfect person to bring in here is my brother, my friend, Reginald Williams. He is a brother who actually trains and develops young men to become strong leaders in our communities. He's a consultant, and his latest book is entitled A Marginalized Voice. What's up, Reg? How you doing, bro?
Man, how you doing today, man?
All is well, man. As good as it could be. I'm troubled, man, as I look around the nation. Last time we talked, we had a chance to not only talk around the book as you were preparing for the book, but then even once the book came out. But this thing is prophetic. It is poignant. It is on time for the season that we're living in. When we look out in the streets and we see folks who are frustrated because of the George Floyd case in Minneapolis, African-American man killed by a white police officer who literally kneed him in the neck until he died. Roughly about 9 minutes, and everybody saw the tape literally from beginning to end. What is it that you found in your research that is the most loud echo amongst this group that is not being heard?
Well, we can use the George Floyd case. The brother told you, I can't breathe. The brother told you, my stomach hurts. The brother said, everything hurts. Yet and still his voice was marginalized. He did not was four of them, they did not heed to his voice. And so this is the problem with these, I was on a call the other day and somebody called them misguided youth. Well, they're misguided because they've lived a life of being unheard. And so if you can't hear my voice, then you will feel my heat.
Wait a minute, wait. Say that again.
If you will not hear my voice, you will not hear my heart, then you will feel my heat.
Something that really caught my attention, man, last night. I know we were texting back and forth, watching the news, and we were saying, you know what, this thing is going to come on CNN. They're talking about, black men and, dying in disproportionate numbers. And you said, you know what, I bet you they're going to have at least 5 quotes or comments or topics from my book. And sure enough, in the first 5 minutes, it was probably 2 of them. Mm-hmm. And what are some of the key things that you were trying to communicate through your book, A Marginalized Voice?
Well, it's 2 things. One is and I'm going to keep going around the George Floyd, if there is a language of riot going on and you don't particularly like that language, then you have to at least ask the question, why is this the language that they're talking now? And so what I found out, or the reason that I decided to write this book, is because there was 2 things I noticed. Is one, that these young kids, what I call young kings, they were not being listened to on no form or no fashion. And oftentimes, some of the reasons that they weren't being listened to is because someone always thought that they knew better than they, in terms of what they were feeling and how they saw things. There's a term that I use in the book. It's actually a term that drove me through the book. It's a medical term called iatrogenic, and it's where well-intended people do unintended harm. Although the harm is unintended, it's still harm. And so what happens is we have our professionals, whether they are educators, whether they are our therapists, whether they are counselors, whether they are parents, who think that we're doing good stuff for them. And oftentimes we find out that things that you thought were good were harming them. And the reason that you didn't realize that they were being harmed is because you chose not to listen to what it was that they had to say.
A lot of times young people, specifically young men of color, black boys and young men come from traumatic situations, traumatic communities. I mean, where PTSD, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I believe that it is prevalent in a lot of our communities. And what we're seeing with some of this rage and outrage and frustration that we're seeing as a result of the George Floyd case is just that, is the trauma being revisited over and over and over and over again. I'm tired of seeing it. I'm in pain. It was one story in your book where you talk about, I think a brother's name was Raheem, I think it was, where he was at school and he was listening to his headphones, but the resource officer, which is basically a police officer at the school, really got a little heated with him to check him, say, take your headphones off. And part of it, that was his therapy. To be able to listen to a song or whatever it was, to, he's coming out of a community that's rough. He's got to go into a school where he may or may not be underperforming, but he's feeling all the stress and he's trying to be, get some therapy from the music. Talk to me about that concept, that whole Raheem story.
Well, the first, before I get there, because you said something, you talked about prevalence as it related to trauma. And you'll hear people, therapists, clinicians, things of that nature, call it post-traumatic stress disorder. Right. I don't call it that. I call it persistent traumatic stress disorder. Wow. Because for young Black kids, right, they never get to leave the trauma. When you look at post, you're looking at a soldier who's on the other side of the world, Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever, there's an incident that causes trauma. They pack up eventually and they leave and they come home to domestic soil, right? So they've left where their trauma exists. But for your young Black boys, the trauma exists right in their neighborhoods. Oftentimes it exists right in their house. So it's not post for them, it's persistent. And how do you live in wellness when you're consistently or persistently in trauma? So I just wanted to bring that point out. But you look at any research, you'll find any kind of research, and they will tell you that music is art, any type of art. It's therapy, it's therapeutic, right? And so what happened on this particular day, and it's funny because I didn't know the boys, I didn't know the young king's real name, so I gave him the name Raheem, and I gave him the name Raheem after the character in Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, Radio Raheem, who got choked out. And so what happened was the young king comes in, and I saw the entire thing. This was about an 8-minute episode. The young king comes in to the school. He's a little late. He has his headphones on, and as soon as he walks in the door, the school resource officer says, "Yo, take those headphones off." Right? And he kind of has the young man come with him to the office, and on the way to the office, he's just kind of berating him, just like constantly pouring fuel on this situation. The young boy really didn't say anything, man. He just kind of listened. It was, you got to school resource officer who's a professional, who's inflaming the situation, and you got the young boy who's like, man, come on, it's not even this serious. And when he finally lets this kid go, he says, next time I see you wearing these earphones, I'm going to take them from you and call your parents. And in my head, I'm thinking, the first thing was, why were you so aggressive with this dude, man? Like, it wasn't necessary. He never disrespected you. He never dishonored you. He complied to every command that you gave him, but yet and still you were just really disrespectful. And kind of the crux of the story is, man, that was his therapy. And I know as a school resource officer, you had the responsibility of telling him that he needed to take it off. But there was a way to deliver that message that could have been therapeutic for him, could have been cathartic for him, and also could have been a way that you delivered it that could have built a relationship. But all you did was just make him dislike you.
Methodology is something that's catching my attention as well. Now that you bring up that story and you talk about the way that the message was delivered to the young man that you reference as Raheem in your book, I'm looking at just last night on the news in Atlanta, with the unrest going on, the protests going on, and things got a little heated last evening. And there were a lot of police in the community, of course, as there are in 20, 30 some odd cities around the nation. But there was one story that caught my attention where these police officers got real rough with 2 college kids, a young lady from Spelman, a young man from Morehouse, and they snatched them and tased them. And it was really violent. And to me, it just seemed like it was way over the top. When in fact, maybe if they had the tools, meaning these law enforcement officers. And my first thought was, oh, these white police officers. It was 2 black police officers. It was 2 brothers that did it. They were the most violent. And it was one portion of the video that I caught, and I had to rewind it 2 or 3, 4 times and look at it. And it was the guy who was dealing with the driver, which was the young male. It was a black police officer, black young man. He's snatching him out of the car, and he's really about to get real violent with him. And it was interesting that it was a white police officer kind of calmed him down. Say, hey, man, we got it. And he kind of almost protected the young man, took him into custody. But I was like, wow, well, it's not just a black thing. It sounds like it's a generational thing on top of that, or even a cultural thing when it comes to speaking to a community that may come from a so-called marginalized community. How do we start to bridge that gap and communicate more effectively?
It's really simple. It's just being heard, man. You don't have to agree with what I say. You don't even have to like what I say. But we sit down and have a conversation. Can I be heard? Can we have a conversation? And oftentimes you can't even have a conversation. So like I say, if you're not going to hear me, at least hear my heart, you're going to feel my heat. And so to your question, and yes, a lot of times it is law enforcement of color who are doing the same things, because they are adopting and embracing a Eurocentric view of how to police. You know what I'm saying? So even though you may have that particular uniform on, and it happens in schools, if you're looking at everything, or if you're trying to deliver solutions from a Eurocentric point of view, then it doesn't really make a difference that you're black or white. But the first thing is, man, I keep hearing training. It's not training. It's morals, man. Do you have the moral? What are your morals as it relates to humanity? Because, for me, there are things that I cannot do to anyone, no matter who they are. Black, white, older, younger, whatever. I have a moral responsibility to treat you as a human being, and so I think that's something that can't be trained. So from a police point of view, they have to do a better job in terms of who they're bringing into the academy and who they're processing through the academy to become police officers.
When you talk about this voice that's marginalized, you're talking about somebody on the so-called outer fringes of the economic system, educational system, social system here in America. So what steps can we begin to do, either one, to bring these marginalized voices into the inner circle to be heard, and 2, to be plugged into, and so they're in a position where they can be more prosperous?
Great question, Matt. One of the things I said in the introduction of the book is that, young black boys are not the only marginalized group in America. You have young girls, you have women, you have immigrants, you have people who are disability, you have the LGBTQIA community. And so what we have to begin to understand, if we really want to make an impact, is that even though we have different, and I just said I chose to speak about young black boys, but what we have to do if we really want to make an impact is that although we're marginalized for different reasons, we are all marginalized. And we have to understand that we are going to come together collaboratively to fight those who continue to try to push us out on the margins. So if you have people, you have immigration issues, and you have people who, gay and homosexual, or you have people who are young and black, or you have women, or you have whatever that group is, if we understand that even though our issues are different, we're still being marginalized, and so therefore we should fight together, that's when we begin to bridge a gap and begin to make a difference and make a push against those who continually try to push us to the margins.
One thing that I'm really seeing, man, there's a thing that I'm really seeing in this season now as we start to have this conversation around demarginalizing all of these different groups that you're talking about. The thing that was really refreshing to me, it was surprising to me, because we've seen, police brutality before, we've seen protests before, we've seen terrorist attacks before, but this is the first time that I've ever seen this many diverse people come together for one particular topic. And it seems like as a whole group of people, all of whom seem to be marginalized, people who are not being heard. And they say, you know what, if you can't hear me, then I'm going to make you hear me. You, like you said earlier, I'm going to make you feel me, because I'm going to go ahead and start to tear some things up because of my frustration.
Again, Matt, you bring up so many points, man. There's a lot of different places to go. But before I go there, this is the first time in my life that I've seen police officers and high ranking police officers make condemning statements about the act of a police officer. You look at, there was a police officer, Chief David Rowdy in Chattanooga, Tennessee. There was where I live, well, not where I live now, but where I once lived in Durham, a police chief, C.J. Davis, police chief Gina Hawkins out of Fayetteville, North Carolina. There was a guy by the name of Joel Moats in Post County. He was a sheriff. Both of these guys were white. And just so many police officers who have said, hey, you know what, we got to come together because that type of behavior is making our profession look bad and it's putting our lives in jeopardy. I said all that, and I don't really remember the question, Matt, but it has sparked even police officers to say, no, this is not the way to behave. Now, can you repeat your question, Matt?
Well, that's it. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Is how do we, you know, really more, it's not so much a question, more of a trying to get your perspective on how you feel about all these different marginalized voices coming together. Because I'm looking at these protests, man, and I'm seeing everybody. I'm seeing everyone coming together with the same level of frustration. And yes, we're sad about George Floyd, but it's deeper than that. It's frustration of the COVID-19. It's frustration that there are 40 million plus people who've lost jobs. It's frustration because we've got, you know, a racist administration in place. It's, you know, it's divisive in its whole very nature. In the past 3 years, we've seen it in power. And, you know, number 45 is strikingly silent in the last several days when we saw at a time when we need someone to come together and say something, hey, man, you know, let's have peace in the land. We need a voice that's going to be comforting. That's exactly what we're not getting. So my thought is, you know, what are your views on so many marginalized voices coming together?
I think it's beautiful. I think that you asked something along the lines of, you know, about the rioting or the getting together with some of the effects of it. But, you know, Spike Lee said something yesterday, and I wish that I did write it down. He said that he didn't necessarily think the way that they were protesting was necessarily right. He says, but then how do you have a proportional answer to mass murder, right? Wow. And so, you know, that was like a powerful statement that was made. I'm be the first one to tell you, you're never going to see me marching. You're never going to see me face to face with a police officer. It has nothing to do with fear. It's just that I feel that I could be more effective somewhere else. But I do believe that when people are rioting and tearing down stuff, it gets their attention. And so I'm not, again, that's not something I'm going to do. Yeah. It's not something I'm going to say is the right thing to do, but I'm going to tell you, it gets their attention. My
perspective is very similar to that, where I'm like, I'm not carrying a sign, you know, I'm all for the support. My thing is, you know, through getting information out, telling stories, you know, the media perspective, the word simply means middle place. It's getting information from here to there so you can make an intelligent, informed decision. That's my thinking. You know, I was talking with Dr. Rashawn Ray the other day. He's a sociologist at University of Maryland, and he was saying the same thing. You need both and. You need folks out in the street, you know, marching and protesting, but you also need folks who are dealing with policy and people dealing with all these different perspectives playing our parts, and we need both and, you know.
Check this out, Matt. When you, like, you know, I'm walking down the halls of Congress, man, and I'm in offices and I'm having conversations, I'm writing letters, right? But when, you know, you can do that, I played a part of one particular bill that took place here in Maryland, and we just, it took maybe 8-9 years for it to happen. Well, there wasn't any unrest somewhere else, right? When there's unrest going, when they're burning down stuff, and then you go talk about a bill, it's like, well, okay, well, you know, I want to deal with Reggie rather than unrest, so let's go ahead and get. So what I'm saying is, both ends have their value. Again, I'm not going to be out there. That's not me. That's what it has its value, and it's what I told someone the other day. You can agree or disagree with the way that they're going about it, but it is a language that is being heard because you didn't hear another language before that. So you had an opportunity to hear a different language. You chose not to hear it, and so now you're feeling it by the way that they're demonstrating.
One of the things that really that has been part of my campaign is to get people to hear each other. Mm-hmm. If we both talking at the same time, we're not really listening. I think about ways that we can better communicate our stories to other people, because I may not have grown up in your environments or another person's environment, whether it's race, socioeconomic, whatever kind of background you come from. My background may be completely different. It was years until I really had any kind of real respect for police. I grew up in Oakland. I went to high school with, Huey P. Newton's son and Bobby Seale's son. Literally, Angela Davis was the keynote speaker at my high school graduation. So that's where I come from. I moved 3,000 miles away to get out of Oakland at the time. It was full of gangs and guns. And I can't begin to tell you how many people I know who have either died or went to prison. And so for me, police was not a good thing. It was something to hide from or get away from. And then I met people who were police officers. And I was like, they're people like anybody else. They're good and bad people in every situation. But one thing that I've come to learn is knowing that human beings are human beings, but also recognizing a person's pain, a person's experiences, a person's feelings are personal to them. At least respect them and honor them, and at least try to understand them before you start to try to be understood. You should also try to seek to understand first. Before you should try to be understood.
I was a young man who was blessed enough to have father married my mother, and I watched him in terms of his example. Matt, me and my dad, man, we clashed. Oh man, we just could not see eye to eye. I was grown. I would walk into my parents' house. I would not speak to the dude. And my wife was like, dude, that you wrong for that. Like, there's just no, and I had my boys who were telling me, yo, dude, you can't do that. And finally, I kind of softened up and, we started, talking a little bit. But here's what happened. God has a funny way of getting your attention. My dad died, and we weren't at the same kind of odds when he died, but he died. And I asked my younger brother was with him when he died. And I asked my younger brother, I said, Rodney, what time did Daddy die? And he said he died at 1:10 a.m. Man, I was born at 1:10 a.m.
Wow. So
at the very moment that I had breath, or God gave me breath, God took it from him. So I said, yo, God, what are you trying to tell me? And so I put everybody, we were in the hospital room. I put everybody out the hospital room, and I sat there and I talked to my father for a good 20, 30 minutes. He couldn't talk back to me. And I kept asking myself, why couldn't I have this type of conversation with my father when he was living? And the thing that I got out of all of that, Matt, is that I tried to rate my father by perfection. And what I needed to know is that he wasn't perfect. And but more importantly, what I needed to know was I never understood what his pain was. I never stopped to say, Dad, what was it that drove you, or what hurt you, or how do you see life? And so I never understood his pain. And because I never took the time to understand him, because like you said, rather than seek to be understood, have understanding first, I never took the time to understand him. And I feel bad that I didn't do that. And, when you start talking about marginalized voice, you're talking about not understanding people, man. People just want to be heard. The reason why I can relate to young kings the way I relate to them, man, is because I always allow them to teach me. I don't take the position that I am older, I know more than you do. I sit down and say, hey, yo, let's sit down and have a conversation. And then that conversation is always about what can I learn from you so that I can be support to you.
It's an old saying, I think it was Voltaire that said, perfect is the enemy of the good. And you just touched on something right there that many times, when we're looking at people that we consider marginalized, or people who are literally marginalized on the fringes of society, be it economic, educational, whatever it is, that we're looking for them to be perfect in our eyes, or to ascribe to a standard of perfection that we see. And if they don't live up to it, then we emotionally or socially, we kind of push them to the side, and they end up in the margins. They end up in that outer space. how do we get to a place of being able to, one, you kind of touched on one there where you kind of listen and try to learn, but what are some other ways that we can try to respect people's perceived imperfections?
There really is no other way, Matt. Like again, I'm just going back to the population of people I work with. I attempt at all costs to learn everything that I can. I consume myself with learning about my population of people, right? And it's either through having a conversation about them. If Matt Anderson puts out a video, not a video, but a documentary about my population of people, I'm getting that video or that documentary because I need to know. And the thing is, you know, as I said, when you sit down, I give you a story from the book. There's a lady, her name is Rita Pearson. She has now since deceased. She was like an educated extrovert? Yeah. Extraordinaire. That's what.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. And but she was also a therapist, so she was an educator and a therapist. And she talks about the story of this kid, a student, where she had given a test. There were 20 questions on the test, and the student got 18 of the answers, 18 of the questions wrong, and she put +2 and a smiley face on there. And the teacher says, the student comes to Miss Pearson, says, "Miss Pearson, did I fail?" And she said, "Yeah, baby." He said, "Well, why did you put +2 on there and a smiley face?" She said, "Because, baby, you got 2 right. And I know once we talk about this thing, you'll be able to get more right the next time." Now, how do you think that kid walked away feeling? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like she loved on that kid, that student, irrespective of the fact that they got 18 answers wrong. And she left that student with a positive thought process of who they were, you know? And so I think that's what we have to do. And I think that's who I am, and I won't be long. I tell the story, and I just give it short, man. At 15 years old, my grandmother got a knock on the door, and she was told that her eldest son had been shot and he was murdered. And I watched my grandmother less than 10 minutes after her learning that news begin to pray. And Matt, she was praying for the man who shot her son. Less than 10 minutes. She didn't pray that her son wasn't shot. She didn't pray. And I was mad with her. At 15 years old, I was mad with her, you know. But one of these days, I'm gonna tell you the long version of that story. But that's what I come from. That's what I subscribe to. And my upbringing was about understanding and being available for the people that you are in contact with. And when you do that, you can change the world.
Reggie, I appreciate you, man. You know, I'm about out of time here, man. We definitely got to tell folks where to get the book, A Marginalized Voice. Where can people pick it up?
You know, I often, hey, are you on Amazon? There's a whole reason why I'm not on Amazon. So I have my own e-commerce store built, and you can get it from AMV. That's like A Marginalized Voice, AMVonlinestore.com, AMVonlinestore.com.
AMVonlinestore.com. All right, got it right here on the bottom of the screen for him. All right, yeah. So y'all can write that down. Make sure you get it. Hey, Reggie, I appreciate you, man. We definitely got to have you back on, my brother. We'll be talking to you real soon. Make sure you stay safe. Make sure your family stays safe, man. I appreciate you, man.
You as well, man. Thank you, man. Love you, man.
All right, bless you, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, peace.
My message to you is to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind.